In 2015, Theranos was worth $9 billion. Its founder, Elizabeth Holmes, was worth an estimated $4.5 billion on paper. She was on the covers of Forbes, Fortune, and Time. The story was irresistible. A Stanford dropout who was going to revolutionize medicine. One drop of blood from a fingertip, hundreds of tests, results in hours. None of it was real. Theranos was not a medical breakthrough, it was a decade-long lie. And the people who paid the price were not the investors. They were patients. Elizabeth Holmes dropped out of Stanford in 2003 at 19 years old. She had one core fear, needles. One core idea, eliminate them. Her pitch was simple. Blood tests were expensive, slow, and invasive. A conventional venipuncture panel could cost hundreds of dollars and take days to process. Holmes said Theranos could do it faster, cheaper, and from a fingertip prick. She called her prototype device the Edison. Holmes was a gifted fundraiser. She raised her first venture round in 2004. By 2010, Theranos had raised over $90 million in total private funding. She cultivated a board unlike anything Silicon Valley had seen before. Henry Kissinger, George Shultz, 2 former secretaries of defense, a retired Marine general. This was not accidental. Holmes wanted gravity, not scrutiny. She also adopted a uniform, a black turtleneck, a deliberate echo of Steve Jobs. She even trained herself to speak in a baritone voice, according to former employees. In 2013, Holmes signed a deal that should have collapsed the entire illusion. Walgreens agreed to deploy Theranos wellness centers in its pharmacy stores across Arizona. Patients walked in, got a finger prick, and trusted the results with their health. The problem was that the Edison device could only reliably run a handful of tests. For most of its panels, Theranos was secretly using conventional Siemens analyzers, then diluting the finger prick samples to fit machines designed for venous blood. This introduced systematic error. Results were wrong, sometimes dangerously wrong. One patient received a result suggesting he might have HIV. He didn't. Another received a false positive for syphilis. A third received abnormal thyroid readings that led to unnecessary medication adjustments. Inside Theranos, employees who raised concerns were fired or threatened with lawsuits. Holmes had constructed a culture of total secrecy. Departments could not talk to each other. Employees signed non-disclosure agreements so broad they couldn't tell their own lawyers the name of their employer. Her chief enforcer was Ramesh Balwani, known as Sunny, her romantic partner and company president. Balwani had no medical background. He had previously run an internet company during the dot-com era. Together, Holmes and Balwani created a company that looked like the future from the outside. Inside, it was held together with deception, intimidation, and borrowed time. Investors kept pouring in money because they were never shown data. DeVos family, Walton family, Rupert Murdoch, who put in $125 million. In total, Theranos raised approximately $900 million from private investors. Holmes told investors she had contracts with the Department of Defense. She claimed Theranos devices were being used on medevac helicopters in Afghanistan. This was not true. The Pentagon had run a limited trial and found the results unreliable. The Securities and Exchange Commission later called these claims false and misleading. But in 2014, nobody on the outside knew any of this. Holmes gave a TED Talk. She appeared at the Clinton Global Initiative. She partnered with the Cleveland Clinic. She announced a deal with Safeway. Safeway had spent $350 million renovating its in-store health clinics for the partnership. The Theranos Walgreens rollout went live in 2013 and expanded to 40 locations by 2014. Regulators were never shown how the Edison machine actually worked. Holmes argued Theranos was a tech company, not a medical lab, and therefore exempt from FDA review. The FDA disagreed eventually, but by the time regulators arrived, years had already passed. The crack that broke everything open came from a single journalist. John Carreyrou at the Wall Street Journal had received a tip in early 2015. He spent months building a network of former employees willing to speak despite their NDAs. Theranos responded with David Boies, one of the most feared. Litigators in America, Boies sent letters to Carreyrou's sources threatening legal action. He sent letters to Carreyrou himself. On October 15, 2015, Carreyrou's first story ran on the front page of the Wall Street Journal. Holmes went on CNBC the next morning and called the story false and misleading. The Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services launched its own inspection that same month. Inspectors arrived at Theranos' Newark, California lab in November 2015. What they found was catastrophic. In January 2016, CMS issued a formal notice. Theranos posed immediate jeopardy to patient safety. In July 2016, CMS banned Holmes from operating any clinical laboratory for 2 years. Theranos voided 2 years of Edison test results, affecting tens of thousands of patients. Walgreens terminated its partnership in June 2016. Safeway had already walked away. In March 2018, the SEC charged Holmes and Balwani with massive fraud. Holmes settled with the SEC, paying a $500,000 fine and returning shares. The Department of Justice went further. In June 2018, a federal grand jury indicted both Holmes and Balwani. Theranos dissolved in September 2018, 15 years after Holmes had walked away from Stanford. The $9 billion company had zero viable products, zero revenue from actual working technology. Investors recovered nothing. In November 2021, Holmes went to trial. The courtroom was in San Jose, 3 miles from her old headquarters. Her defense argued she genuinely believed in the technology, that she was a victim of Balwani's abuse. On January 3, 2022, the jury found Holmes guilty on 4 counts of fraud. In November 2022, she was sentenced to 11 years and 3 months in federal prison. Balwani was convicted separately on 12 counts and sentenced to nearly 13 years. Here's the complete list of why Theranos collapsed. The technology never worked. The Edison device was unreliable on the test that mattered most. Holmes built a wall of secrecy so total that even board members never saw the real data. Investors ignored red flags because the story was too good and the board too prestigious to question. Regulators were kept in the dark for years because Holmes exploited a gap between FDA oversight categories and real patients were put at risk. People made medical decisions based on results that were simply wrong. The Theranos story is often told as a cautionary tale about Silicon Valley's fake-it-till-you-make-it culture. That framing is too comfortable. It suggests the system was deceived. The system was not deceived. The system chose not to look. Theranos raised $900 million without ever publishing a single peer-reviewed study. That is not a failure of one founder. That is a failure of an entire ecosystem. George Shultz, the former Secretary of State, sat on Theranos' board for years. His own grandson, Tyler Shultz, was a Theranos employee who tried to report the fraud to regulators. George Shultz sided with Holmes, not his grandson. Theranos survived as long as it did because everyone involved had a reason to believe. Investors wanted the next Apple. Walgreens wanted a moat against Amazon Health. The board wanted relevance, and patients wanted to believe their health could be cheap, fast, and painless. Holmes did not manufacture a product. She manufactured a mirror. Every investor, every board member, every magazine editor saw in Theranos exactly what they wanted to see. In 2015, Theranos was worth $9 billion, and Elizabeth Holmes was the youngest female self-made billionaire in history. Today, Holmes is serving an 11-year federal sentence. The company is gone. The technology never existed. The biggest fraud in Silicon Valley history was not built on a lie that nobody could have caught. It was built on a truth that nobody wanted to admit, that the desire to believe is more powerful than the obligation to verify. And in that gap between belief and verification, real people got hurt.